The silence in the grand chamber of the High Synod was not empty. It was heavy, a suffocating physical weight that pressed against the chitinous plates and velvet robes of every delegate present. A silence born not of peace, but of a terrified, paralyzed confusion that had seized the very heart of the Ethelgard hegemony. The chamber itself was a monument to 10,000 years of unshakable order, a vast, spherical hollow carved from the living obsidian of the moon Typhon, illuminated only by the bioluminescent veins of the rock and the colossal, suspended holographic projection that dominated the center of the room. This map, the stellar cartography of the known sectors, was usually a thing of static beauty, a calm sea of blue and gold stars representing the stable, civilized territories of the council races, but today it was bleeding. It was bleeding a harsh, rhythmic crimson that pulsed in time with the silent alarms flashing across the retinal displays of the High Exarchs, a warning light that originated from a sector that had, until 3 standard cycles ago, been dismissed as a desolate, radioactive backwater devoid of sentient potential. The source of the alarm was Sector Sol, a region of space marked on the oldest star charts as a navigational hazard due to debris density and unstable solar flares. Yet now, the great central projector was struggling to render the data it was receiving. The logic processors of the Council's most advanced supercomputers caught in a loop of contradiction that defied the fundamental laws of astrophysical categorization. High Exarch Vok, a venerable Valeri whose carapace had grayed with the passing of 4 centuries, leaned forward from his raised dais, his multifaceted eyes narrowing as he watched the flickering designation hovering over the 3rd planet of the Sol system. Beside him, the air shimmered with the heat of the cooling vents, struggling to handle the processing load required to analyze the anomaly. Vok's mandibles clicked together in a slow, rhythmic expression of deep anxiety, a sound that was amplified by the acoustics of the chamber, echoing like the ticking of a doomsday clock. He looked down at the datapad embedded in the stone of his podium, reading the error report for the 100th time, hoping that the glyphs would rearrange themselves into something that made sense, something that did not threaten to overturn the doctrine of the hegemony. The report was concise, brutal, and impossible. It read target designation, Terra, classification, planetary body, class 115 Deathworld, secondary classification, capital vessel, dreadnought class, status, mobile. The cognitive dissonance required to accept those words was inducing a headache behind Vok's eyes, a sharp throb that synchronized with the pulsing red light of the map. He looked to his left, where Fleetmaster Calith of the warrior caste stood, her towering form encased in ceremonial battle plate that hummed with the latent energy of personal shielding. Calith was a creature of war, a strategist who had burned a dozen rebellious worlds to glass, yet even she looked disturbed, her claws resting uneasily on the hilt of her plasmaglaive, her gaze fixed on the impossible red dot that was slowly, inexorably moving across the star map, ignoring orbital mechanics, ignoring gravity wells, moving with a purpose that celestial bodies simply did not possess. "The sensors are malfunctioning," Calith growled, her voice a grinding of tectonic plates, deep and resonant, vibrating in the chests of the gathered diplomats. "It is a glitch in the long-range arrays. A planet does not break its orbit. A planet does not generate a subspace wake. We are looking at a sensor ghost, a phantom created by solar interference or a sabotage of the logic core. To convene the High Synod for a glitch is an insult to our time and a display of weakness before the lesser client races." She gestured dismissively with a clawed hand, the servos in her armor whining softly, but the bravado in her voice was thin, a veneer stretched over a palpable tension that she could not quite hide. She wanted it to be a glitch. She needed it to be a glitch, because if the readings were accurate, if the energy signatures pouring out of that sector were real, then the fleet she commanded, the greatest armada in the galaxy, was effectively obsolete. The energy output designated by the passive sensors was not measured in terawatts or petawatts. It was measured in percentages of stellar output, numbers so high that they belonged to stars, not civilizations, numbers that suggested a mastery of matter and energy that the hegemony had only theorized about in their most abstract physics philosophies. "It is not a glitch, Fleetmaster," came the soft, trembling voice of Scholar Xylos, a slender avian creature perched on a suspended ring of anti-gravity discs near the ceiling of the chamber. Xylos was the foremost expert on xenobiology and stellar anomalies, a being who lived for the discovery of the new, but who now looked down at the assembly with eyes wide with a primal terror, his feathers ruffled and dull. He manipulated a floating interface with frantic, delicate movements of his talons, projecting a stream of raw data into the air for the Council to see. We have cross-referenced the telemetry with the observation buoys in the Theta Quadrant. We have triple-checked the gravitational lensing. The object is a rocky planet, approximately 12,000 kilometers in diameter, possessing an iron-nickel core, a nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere, and a hydrosphere covering 70% of its surface. It meets all the biological criteria for a Class 115 Deathworld: hyper-competitive evolution, high gravity, tectonic instability, extreme weather variance, and a microbial biosphere so aggressive it dissolves standard containment suits in minutes. But the Fleetmaster is incorrect to call it a planet in the traditional sense. Look at the vector. Look at the magnetic field. Xylos tapped a command, and the hologram zoomed in, stripping away the visual layer of the planet to reveal the magnetic spectrum. The chamber gasped, a collective intake of breath from 100 different species. The magnetic field of the world was not the chaotic, natural dynamo of a rotating core. It was a lattice. It was a perfect, geometric cage of energy that encased the entire world, a structured, artificial magnetosphere that was being manipulated with surgical precision. Field was not just protecting the atmosphere, it was grabbing the fabric of spacetime. It was pulling. "The planet is not drifting," Xylos whispered, the horror in his voice amplified by the silence. "It is driving. The entire world has been converted into a propulsion system. They are using the planetary core as a reactor and the crust as a hull. They are moving the entire world at sublight relativistic speeds, and the subspace distortion suggests they are preparing to jump. A planetary jump. The mass calculation alone, it should tear the system apart. It should collapse the local star. But it doesn't. They have dampened the inertial mass of a planet." Vok felt the cold stone of the podium beneath his hands, felt the reality of his empire trembling. The hegemony had ruled for millennia because they controlled the hyperlanes, the static routes between stars. They controlled the trade, the movement, the flow of resources. But if a species could move their own world, if they could take their resources, their atmosphere, their factories, and their population with them, they were beholden to no one. They were a civilization that could not be besieged because they could simply leave. And not just leave, they could ram. The thought intruded unbidden into Vok's mind. What happens if a planet moving at relativistic speeds impacts a stationary orbital defense grid? The answer was simple: the grid ceases to exist. The planet would barely feel it. The sheer kinetic energy of such an object was a weapon greater than any antimatter warhead. The title on the screen, "Dangerous Ship," was not a metaphor. It was a gross understatement. "We have hailed them," Vok said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his gut. "We have sent the standard greeting protocols on all frequencies. We have broadcast the Articles of Submission and the Treaty of Peace. What is the response?" He looked toward the communications officer, a cybernetic insectoid integrated directly into the chamber's comms array. The officer chittered, a sound of frustration and confusion. "No response to the articles, High Exarch. They are broadcasting, but not to us. They are flooding the spectrum with noise. Music, mathematics, old radio plays, visual data of oceans, forests, storms. It is chaotic. It is not the silence of a predator, nor the orderly greeting of a civilized race. It is a cacophony, but amidst the noise there is a single repeating vector signal. They are requesting permission to transit through the Typhon Gate. They are asking us to move our fleet." Kalith slammed her fist onto the railing. "Move our fleet? They demand we move the Grand Armada for a single vessel? Even if it is a planet, it is one world. We have 10,000 ships in the Typhon sector. We should open fire. We should target the tectonic stress points and crack that shell before it gets any closer. If they are a Class 115 species, they are aggressive by nature. They are monsters. You know the protocols for Deathworlders. They are rabid, uncontrollable, and consume everything. If they have the technology to move their star, they are a plague. We must destroy them while they are still in real space." "And if you fire," Xylos interjected, his voice sharp, "and their shields hold, what then, Fleetmaster? You are assuming their defensive capabilities are inferior to their propulsion. A species that can dampen the inertia of a planet can likely dampen the impact of your plasma torpedoes. And if you antagonize them, if you turn a traveler into an enemy, do you want that thing parking in orbit over our homeworld? Do you want a Deathworld to declare war?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable. The logic of the hegemony was built on overwhelming force, but here was a force that overwhelmed their understanding of physics. Vok raised a hand to silence the rising murmurs of the council. "They are sending a delegate. he announced, dropping the final piece of information that had been burning a hole in his datapad. The vector signal included a transport request. A shuttle has already detached from the anomaly. It is on final approach to the spire. It is small, unarmed. It contains a single biological entity. The fear in the room shifted. It transformed from the abstract fear of a celestial object to the visceral fear of the monster at the door. A Class 115 Deathworlder. The biological classification system of the hegemony went from 1 to 100. 1 was a garden world, a paradise of soft light and low gravity where the bones of the inhabitants were like spun glass. 100 was a volcanic hellscape where life was a constant war of attrition. 115 was a theoretical limit, a designation reserved for worlds where the gravity would crush a standard exoskeleton, where the pathogens were lethal within seconds, where the radiation would sterilize a city. And something from that hell had built a ship out of its own cage and was coming to dinner. "Let them come," Kalith hissed, her mandibles flaring. "Let us see this monster. Let us see the beast that thinks it can drive a world through our borders." The doors to the grand chamber were 20 meters high, made of solid durasteel and engraved with the history of the hegemony's conquests. They were designed to intimidate, to make any petitioner feel small, insignificant, and crushed by the weight of history. As the heavy gears ground into motion and the doors slowly parted, the council held its breath, expecting a behemoth. They expected a creature of scales and claws, a towering monstrosity encased in power armor, dripping with toxins, roaring a challenge. The atmospheric recyclers hissed, pumping a neutral gas mix into the entry corridor to accommodate the guest, though the council members had engaged their own rebreathers, fearing airborne contamination. The darkness of the corridor was absolute for a moment, and then from the shadows the sound of footsteps echoed. Not the heavy, clanking tread of war boots, but the rhythmic, distinct click-clack of hard-soled shoes on stone. Into the light walked a biped. It was terrifyingly small. It stood perhaps 2 meters tall, possessing no natural armor, no claws, no visible cybernetic weaponry. It was wrapped in layers of woven fabric, a suit of charcoal gray, a white shirt, a simple strip of red fabric tied at the neck. Its skin was pale and soft-looking, seemingly defenseless against even a mild abrasion. It had binocular vision, 2 small eyes of a piercing blue that scanned the room not with the hunger of a predator, but with a calm, analytical detachment. It walked with a cane, a simple stick of polished wood topped with silver, though the movement suggested the cane was more an affectation than a necessity. The creature moved into the center of the vast chamber, surrounded by the towering, armored forms of the alien elite, and it did not flinch. It did not cower. It stopped at the designated diplomatic circle, looked up at High Exarch Vok and bowed slightly, a gesture of politeness, not submission. "Greetings," the creature said. Its voice was soft, produced by vibrating vocal cords rather than a syrinx or timbal, yet it carried clearly, assisted by a translation matrix clipped to its lapel. "I am Ambassador Elias Thorne, representing the United Terran Coalition. I apologize for the disruption to your traffic control. We are just passing through." The absurdity of the statement struck Vok like a physical blow, just passing through, as if they were a merchant skiff and not a weaponized planet. Kalith let out a harsh, barking laugh, stepping down from her podium to tower over the human. She was 3 times his height, her shadow swallowing him. "You represent the anomaly," she boomed, her voice amplified. "You, a soft skin, you come from a Class 115 Deathworld. You look like you would break in a high-wind storm. Where is your armor? Where is your protection? The air in this chamber contains trace elements that should be burning your lungs." Elias Thorne looked up at the giant warrior, his expression mild, almost bored. He tapped his cane on the obsidian floor. "We find that armor tends to get in the way of conversation, Fleetmaster. And as for the air, well, I've breathed worse in the industrial sectors of old London during the smog years. My biology is quite capable of filtering your toxins. In fact, your air is a little thin. I'm feeling a bit lightheaded, but in a pleasant way, like being at altitude." "Do not mock us," Kalith snarled, lowering her massive head until her mandibles were inches from the human's face. "Your world is listed as a dangerous ship, a weapon. You disrupt the peace of the hegemony. You refuse to answer the articles of submission. By the laws of this council, you are an invader. Explain why we should not vaporize your vessel where it sits." Thorne's eyes changed. The mildness evaporated, replaced by a sudden, absolute stillness. It was the stillness of a deep ocean trench, the calm before a tsunami. The predator was there, after all, hidden behind the soft skin and the polite smile. He didn't step back. He didn't blink. He looked at the giant alien warlord with a gaze that suggested he had seen things that would make her nightmares look like children's stories. "Fleet Master," Thorn said, his voice dropping an octave, losing its diplomatic polish and becoming hard like cold iron. "You call my home a vessel, you are correct, but you misunderstand its purpose. You ask why you shouldn't vaporize us. I will give you 3 reasons. First, because the shield density of Terra is currently rated to withstand a direct impact from a gamma-ray burst, so your weapons would simply be annoying. Second, because if you fire on us, the gravitational recoil of our engine stabilizers would likely shear the tectonic plates of this moon you are standing on, and I would hate to ruin such a lovely floor." He paused, letting the threat hang there, palpable and heavy. The council watched, paralyzed. The small creature was threatening to crack their moon as a side effect of self-defense. "And the third reason?" Vok asked, his voice trembling slightly. He recognized the tone. It was the tone of an elder speaking to a petulant child. Thorn turned to Vok, his face softening into a look of profound, ancient sadness. "The third reason, High Exarch, is that we are not here to fight you. We are not conquerors. We are refugees. We didn't turn our planet into a ship because we wanted to rule the galaxy. We did it because we had to leave. And we couldn't bear to leave anything behind, not the mountains, not the oceans, not the graves of our ancestors. You see, on a Deathworld, survival isn't about killing the other guy. It's about enduring. It's about holding on to what matters when the universe tries to strip it away. We took our world with us because it is all we have." "Refugees?" Xylos the scholar floated down, his curiosity overcoming his fear. "Refugees from what? What could possibly threaten a species capable of planetary propulsion? What force could make you move a world?" Thorn sighed a long, weary exhalation. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, circular device. He placed it on the floor. "May I?" he asked. Vok nodded. Thorn tapped the device. The air in the chamber shifted. The light from the stellar map dimmed, replaced by a new projection. It was a simulation, a recording of a sector of space far beyond the borders of the hegemony, deep in the unknown regions of the galactic rim. The image showed stars, millions of them, and then it showed them going out, not exploding, not fading over billions of years, simply vanishing. A darkness was spreading across the sky, a void that was not empty space, but an absence of reality. It was a wave of entropy, a cosmic event horizon that was consuming systems whole, erasing matter, energy, and physics itself. It moved like a tide of black oil, smothering the light of the galaxy. "We call it the Great Silence," Thorn said quietly. "It started 1,000 years ago. We saw it coming. Our telescopes picked up the anomaly, stars disappearing without residue. No supernova, no black hole accretion disks, just gone. We calculated the trajectory. It's an entropy wave, a collapse of the vacuum state. It's rewriting the laws of physics into something incompatible with life. We tried to communicate with it. We tried to fight it. We threw antimatter planets at it. They just vanished. It's not an enemy you can shoot, Fleet Master. It's a force of nature. It's the end of the book." The council stared at the horror on the screen. The scale of the destruction was beyond comprehension. Entire constellations were being wiped clean. "We realized we couldn't stop it," Thorn continued. "We realized that the only choice was to run, but where do you go when the sky is falling? We looked at our ships. We had great fleets, but ships break, ships run out of fuel. Ships are cramped metal boxes where cultures die and people forget who they are. We didn't want to survive as a remnant in a tin can. We wanted to live, so we made a decision. A mad, desperate, impossible decision. We decided that if we were going to run, we were taking the house with us. We spent 2 centuries geomorphing our planet. We sank boreholes into the mantle. We built fusion thrusters the size of continents. We turned our atmosphere into a shield buffer. We locked our tectonic plates with gravity staples to keep the world from shaking apart. And then we pushed." Thorn looked at his hands, calloused and old. "Do you know what it feels like to stand on a beach and watch the sun move? Not set, but move. To feel the vibration of the engines deep in your bones, knowing that the ground beneath you is traveling at a significant fraction of the speed of light. It is terrifying. It is magnificent. We have been traveling for 300 years. We have passed through nebulae, skirted the event horizons of black holes, and surfed the gravity waves of neutron stars. We have seen wonders that your stationary empires can only dream of, but we are tired, and the silence is still behind us." "It is following you?" Kalith asked, her aggression replaced by a cold dread. "It is expanding," Thorn corrected. "It spreads in all directions, but we are faster, just barely. We are ahead of the wave, but we need to cross the Typhon Gate. The local geometry of space here is dense. The nebulae, the dust clouds, they slow us down. Our navigational shielding is taking a beating. If we try to go around your territory, it will add 50 years to our journey. The silence will cut the edge of our system. We will lose the outer planets, maybe Mars, maybe Jupiter. We can't afford that. We need the gate. We need the shortcut. Vok looked at the map, at the red dot that was Earth. He looked at the encroaching darkness in the simulation. The political squabbles of the hegemony, the border disputes, the trade tariffs, it all seemed suddenly microscopic. A species had turned their home into an ark to outrun the end of the universe.